Thank you, Neil, and thank you all, and welcome to Atlanta. Thank you to our sponsors, including UPS, Bank of America, and Coca-Cola, and thank you to our dynamic Points of Light team who make this magic happen, along with the leaders in the field who bring their knowledge, expertise, and innovations to this stage, and to the 100 workshops that follow in the next 2 days. Over the course of the last 10 months, former colleagues, friends, and family have asked, why Points of Light? Even my youngest son said, "Mom, you're moving to Atlanta? That's pretty random." But it's not. As children, our parents taught my brother and me that to whom much is given, much is required. Civic engagement was woven into the fabric of our lives. In public education, I experienced the power of passionately engaged parents advocating for change. And the Girl Scouts, well, as the bedrock of a 106-year-old organization, they will teach you a thing or two about the impact of volunteers. What you see in the photos are girls participating in an all-girl triathlon. But what you don't see are the volunteers who showed up at 4 a.m., excited with music and coffee and pastries to string together pool noodles to create swim lanes for the race. Who does that? Show up at 4 a.m. happy. Volunteers, that's who. Neil said my title was Chief Transformation Officer, but the fact is, the volunteers, individuals leading and lending support to causes they care about, are the transformational force. They are the answer to the question, why Points of Light? In my first weeks at Points of Light, it was fun to spend the day with Jay Cranman, who leads our affiliate in this community, Hands On Atlanta. Points of Light affiliates are the lifeline of our work. Leading change in over 200 communities in 37 countries. In the photos from that day, Hands On Atlanta Day, you see a playground being built, trees being planted, and nonprofit websites being built in a hackathon for good. Who's transforming these in-place and digital communities? Techies, neighbors, parents, young people, community activists, all volunteering their time. A rich diversity of humanity where indeed service unites. As President George H.W. Bush said nearly 30 years ago, every problem that the country faces is being solved by some community, by some group or individual. The question is how to get connected so the whole nation can solve problems. He called these individuals points of light, ordinary people who reach beyond themselves to touch the lives of those in need, bringing hope and opportunity to community. By so generously giving of themselves, these remarkable individuals show us not only what is best in our heritage, but what all of us are called to become. Throughout this evening, on this stage, you'll hear from leaders addressing the global water crisis, women discussing the power of voice to collectively achieve equality, men whose personal journeys took different paths but are all leaning into action, and young people who represent a generation ready to use its voice to galvanize change. Their work, our work, is critical, but we know we're being outpaced by problems in our communities. According to the United Nations, globally, more than 2 billion people are living in countries with excess water stress. Gender equality remains out of reach, and economic losses from natural disasters average $250 billion a year, with a disproportionate impact on small and vulnerable countries. Consider this. There are three societal shifts influencing our collective efforts to address these issues. The first is the rapid rise of social networks. 81% of Americans and over 2.8 billion people around the world have a social media profile, redefining our definition of community. The second is the constant innovations in technology. Generation Z, now entering the workforce, was born into a digital world. They live in a state of continuous partial attention, on average using five devices simultaneously. Ironically, we're more connected and disconnected at the same time. And the third is a global leadership crisis. The people and institutions that have historically guided and formed the foundations of society have left people disappointed, disenchanted, and distrustful. But there is hope. Today, business and nonprofits are viewed equally as institutions holding the most hope. In fact, business is now expected to be an agent of change. 72% of people say that they trust their own company. There is an expectation by employees and consumers that companies deliver profits while also delivering on social purpose. We know that a strong, authentic corporate and civic engagement impacts the competition for talent, brand loyalty, and market positioning. Volunteers are seeking out causes because they want to do good, and individuals are turning distrust into action. The movements we see today, #Enough, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, are the undercurrents of a revolution against apathy and for engagement, civic engagement. Imagine the community that takes this engagement to the next level, where all citizens believe and demonstrate that they can make a difference. Where communities are thriving, companies are prosperous, and people are at the center of change, creating and delivering solutions to their most profound challenges because they are inspired and have the tools to do so. Imagine, and let's wrestle with the question, what will it take? What will it take for there to be a global curriculum where all students learn math, literature, science, the arts, and service and volunteerism? For a Nobel Prize to be issued to someone for their contribution to service and volunteerism? What will it take for each of us here to successfully capture the momentum created by these undercurrents and actually unleash the revolution to ignite civic culture? As Dr. Martin Luther King reminded us, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. In closing, going back to the question people have been asking, why points of light? It's because I've been focused on the dynamic between darkness and light for a long time. When President George H.W. Bush was in office and Nelson Mandela was released from prison in 1990, as a young civil rights lawyer living in Chicago, reflecting on the need for light, I wrote a poem. It's called How I Read a Poem Like This, and it's a privilege to share it with you tonight. How I read a poem like this, how it provoked thought, how I'd like to do the same. Provoke thought about racism, about sexism, about classism, about choice, about basic human rights, human needs, human dignity, about action, about empathy, about apathy. How I think about life in America, how I think about its economy, about its drug problem, about health care, mental health care. How I think about its people, about the rich, about the poor, about the average Joe and Jane on the street, about our leaders, about our illiterate, and our homeless. how I think about what I can do to make a difference. Oh, how I think about the crime in my neighborhood. Exhausting. How I think about the victims and the victimizers, the thieves and con artists, the moms with bills and babies, and our gun-toting teens who carry and represent for freedom. How I think about the success in my neighborhood. Invigorating. About our doctors, our lawyers, our engineers, our teachers and tech heads. About our beautiful artists whose words and songs and pictures inspire us to skip from one scene to the next. About those who tap into our natural hopes and joy. About everyday leaders whose life it is to care and pray for others. How I think about our complex judicial system. About the laws and their impact and their intent. About equality. How 5 opinions can change the lives of millions. Think about it. How I think about my education, of the education of my children, of your children, of our children, of all children. People, what is we gonna do? We gonna wake up. We gonna read up, get up, speak up. We gonna count, do the math, and add it up. We gonna rise up, lift up ourselves and others today, today, today. How I think about my lot in life. How I ask you to think about yours. How I read a poem like this. How it provoked thought and action. How I'd like to do the same. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Today, 28 years later, on behalf of Points of Light and our global network, we thank you for doing the same. You, the volunteer manager at the local nonprofit, you, the CSR champion at your company, and you, the individual Point of Light. Over these 3 days, we hope you are inspired and equipped to walk away knowing what it will take. So let's get started.